Hey, Neil McDonnell here, going live. And if you're seeing this, I'm just quickly coming back. I was supposed to do a noon live. There was a technical problem with some of the tools. They fixed the problem. And so I'm going live. And if I can see that the technology works for me, I'm going to do this Air Force event right now. And I'll make it available in the replays for those of you who missed it. And so I'm just going to wait until I see that it's synced and coming back in. And then we'll get started because it is good content. I just had to bump it a couple hours before it got started. So I'm just going to look at this one more time to make sure I'm good to go. I think I am. So there's Air Force. There I am. I can see myself, which is perfect. So, okay, I'm going to get started right in 1 second as soon as I find this. Apologize again to anybody who's coming in now who knows that I missed it before, but such is the nature of live technology. But hello, I'm Neil McDonnell. I'm the president of the GovCon Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to my daily LinkedIn Live, where I discuss process and procedures for you to achieve success in the federal marketplace. I spent 20 years as a small business owner in the federal market space. And since 2018, I've been teaching folks like you that government contracting is not a secret, it's just a process. And part of that process, when you think about going from A to Z, and that process flows in, part of it is business development. Inside of business development is doing research. And so in this particular case, it's research on the Air Force. I want to walk you through getting to know the Air Force. I'm going to talk about what how the Air Force is organized, and then go into some key documents that teach a lot about the Air Force. And this is perfect if you're trying to get to know the Air Force more, trying to find both information about them, perhaps also paths to pursue. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And if you stick with this video, by the end, you'll know a lot more about the Air Force, and you'll definitely have some points of contact that you can follow up on and start knocking on the doors further if you already are doing it, or if you haven't done it before, some doors you can start knocking on. I'm going to share my screen in a minute, but I just wanted to point out something that I talk about a lot is that if you're trying to get to know an agency, there's 3 steps that you can follow from a high level. It's actually what I teach when I teach people how to create new or train new business development folks, junior business developers. You teach them that there's research then leads to outreach, and outreach then leads to capture. And so research and outreach basically are business development. I'm understanding an agency, and I'm understanding I'm identifying opportunities that might be in there. So that's the biggest part of research. And so research and outreach. And then capture is about a single opportunity where you pursue it, right? And so the research and outreach activities that you do will lead to much better capture, which leads to much better proposals, which theoretically leads to a higher likelihood of winning. Today, we're going to talk a lot about that research in the Air Force and selling into the Air Force. So I'm going to share my screen here in a second. Right here, let me just hit share. And sharing. I am sharing. I think I'm good. And you should be able to see my screen popping up here. And so in this particular case, and let me just make sure my phone's turned off. So in this particular case, the homework series that we're going to be talking about, I just wanted to point you out to the GovCon Chamber of Commerce page, our site. We have something called a homework series. And if you click in here, you'll see we have an Air Force page. And in the Air Force page, one of the things that I like in here that I think is really helpful for you is listening to some of these panel interviews I've done, or individual one-off podcast interviews that are available. So you can listen to those. I have some links to key content that my team have put together. But really, I'm just going to drive us forward. I'm going to track on the time. I started at 2:45 East Coast time. I always keep these 30 minutes. So I'm going to keep looking at my clock here just to make sure I'm going to stick to that time. In fact, give me 1 second as I flip this over, and so I can better see the time. Looks like I got text that we're doing fine on the visual part. And I want to do one other thing. I'm going to turn my face off because you don't need to see me at the moment. Oops, wrong one. Okay, so I'm going to share this. I'm going to get rid of my face. Okay, took me a minute to do that, but we're back. So let's get to the Air Force page. This is the Air Force page. And one of the things about the Air Force, and this happens around the federal government, is that sometimes these pages are really useful for us as small businesses or business development and capture people trying to get in and learn more about an agency. And sometimes they just are really unhelpful. And so from the Air Force standpoint, I'm sure what they have here is useful to whatever their target audience is, but their target audience clearly is not industry, right? It is not small businesses in particular. So one of the things that's really important that I look for is an easy way to find commands and what's the structure of the Air Force as an example. And you can't really find it in here. And we'll go to another page. By the way, don't worry. I will show you exactly where you can get some great information. It just happens to not be on the Air Force site itself. But so af.mil, that's their Air Force site. You can go in here, look at the newsroom and see about what they're talking about. But you're not going to learn a lot about the structure and how to drive down into subordinate commands, et cetera. I do have one area I'm going to show you that I think is awesome that'll lay out the structure of the Air Force. So if you really haven't heard of this before, or if you don't really understand how the Air Force is structured, you're going to love this. Anyways, so this is the Air Force small business page. So af.mil is the main Air Force page. And then they created their own huge subdomain here called airforcesmallbiz.af.mil. In here is a lot of stuff, but none of it is overly helpful, unfortunately. So an example is this stuff is outdated. It's FY19 instead of FY 2021. So it's several years old. So that kind of content doesn't really help you. They talk about connecting with small business professionals, but unfortunately, when you try to do that, if you're able to get in here, they don't share names. And so let me just use an example of whatever this base is. So this base is in Missouri in Whiteman Air Force Base. And for any of us who do calls, what we're looking for is the name of a person, their phone number, and their email. And instead, what the Air Force does, unfortunately, is they make everything generic. But don't worry about it. You can come over here to the GovCon Chamber of Commerce, and right here on the left-hand side, you see where it says Directory of Federal Small Business Specialists. That's a free download. It's a directory of over 1,000 small business specialists across the federal agencies, names, numbers, emails, et cetera. And you can download that, and we've put a ton of Air Force small business specialists, their name, their email, and their phone number, not these generic ones, wherever we can find it. So, you have the ability to go in there. There's things that they have up here that are, they call it opportunities, but really they're just doing a SAM dump for you, expiring contracts. And it's better if they just sent you to a search instead of a result. But it is an interesting thing is that if you're not familiar with how to do your own SAM.gov saved searches, you should do that. You can go in there and learn some training on that. But and go to your PTAC, by the way. Your PTACs will be able to teach you this. Go in and set up a saved search. So anytime you want to look in SAM for opportunities that are expiring in the out year here or out years, you can quickly run it and see it. But that's all that they have here. Like if you click on it, you'll see that the results are just this downloaded dump from SAM. So again, it's not like the Air Force is providing us a lot of extra stuff there. Let me go ahead and close this guy because I don't like that. And then the one last thing that I was trying to find, and this is really unfortunate, is where so these things get hard. Let me go back to the small business, the acquisition forecast. So this is another one. And if you're reaching out to the Air Force, or more importantly, if you are the Air Force, I would love it if you could help us. But here is a page that should have the Air Force forecast. Every agency theoretically should be communicating with industry about what the forecast is, but there's nothing on here. They talk about how it's one of the most valuable tools that the Air Force has. I love the irony of this, to communicate future requirements with the small business community. Yet they don't put it here. There's no forecast here. I just did an interview recently with somebody who was in the Air Force saying the same thing, that they can't get access to any tool that is a forecast. So instead they send, expired contracts. It's the best they can do. But it's something to keep in mind that if you're the Air Force, please fix this. And if you're industry and you're talking to somebody who's in the OSDBU office of the Air Force, the Small Business Program Office, talk to them and say, come on, let's fix this thing. But let's get to the places where you can get really good information. So one of my favorite places is DoD. They put down some basic information about the services, Army, Air Force, Navy, etc. And in here, they talk about the Air Force. And so let me click here on this thing. It says get started. I don't know if this thing's in your way. I've got a little window on my screen. I don't know if you see it. But anyways, if we come down, this is the part I love, is that they've got this structure of the Air Force. And I just wanted to walk through this for a second with you as a way to show what's going on or how the Air Force is structured. So a section is basically just a rifle squad, a couple of airmen that are in there. And these pictures are perfect pictures to show you kind of the size of each one. So obviously, or if maybe it's not obvious, but one thing you can think about obviously on the left-hand side is that every time you go up to the next level of command, it includes several of the ones that are below it. So I'm looking at a section. Above a section is a flight. You generally don't sell to a section. You're not selling to a flight. You might sell to a squadron, but certainly a group and higher is where you begin to really sell. So a flight, now you're looking at, here it talks about a flight is comprised of individual airmen or sections, so several of those. A squadron, so now we're starting to get up to a level where people might have some money. And down here, they talk about a squadron consists of 2 or more flights. And you can begin to see the number of personnel that are in there as you look at their pictures, right? The group is where you really start finding some activity in there. And so in here, one of the things I just wanted to point out is related to the group organization. And this is important as I take you further into the Air Force, showing you the major commands that they have, the buying commands that they have. But as you go forward, if you've read this already, it talks about groups mainly take the number of the wing to which they're assigned. And so in this case, it's saying, for instance, the 9th Medical Group is part of the 9th Reconnaissance Wing. And so you'll see that structure. It begins to help you understand which things are aligned to which within the organization. So above a group, you've got a wing, as we just showed. And here it begins to, you see the authority in here is colonel or brigade general or brigadier general, excuse me. And they just talk about, how big it is. And so you look at the 2 types of wings. This would be an interesting one, right? There's 2 types of wings, composite and objective. And I actually don't really track on that as much, but it's interesting to look at that. And when talking with a PTAC counselor or when talking with a small business specialist in the Air Force, you might talk to them and say, hey, this is what we sell. Would I more normally go towards a wing that's a composite wing or go towards an objective wing? And so the objectives, as you look at it, these are based on particular objectives they're trying to achieve. And so, you have to understand, where do you fit in to some of that? I would argue that, me being in the IT space, I'm only going to be in the composite wing, which, they focus anywhere. So anyways, I don't want to go too far into that. I am not an Air Force expert. It's more about the ability to learn about them. Okay, so coming up from the wings, you've got number Air Force. You might think about 16th Air Force, which is the cyber numbered Air Force there or the cyber command for the Air Force. But the wings, squadrons, and groups, they're all assigned to a number Air Force, which usually is a geographical assignment. So you can begin to look at this and you can see the structure. As you get up, the amount that they're buying, if they have contracts that are coming out, they're much larger, much larger. So if you're newer into a business, when you start looking at a wing or higher, you're probably looking at teaming until you have past performance that these guys can trust you. But down below, a group or a squadron, they might take a risk on you because their projects are smaller. The risk they take is smaller. And then the last thing is major commands within the Air Force. Here they just talk about major commands are also called MAGCOMs. And they describe it as being organized in 2 different ways, as a global strike command or a mobility command. And so it can do it by mission or region. And typically some of the stuff you do probably will be around a mission. So I'd be curious on, as you watch this and as you know what you sell, especially some of you who are in here watching today's video, you might already be in the Air Force, so you have experience in the Air Force. I'd be curious on whether you find yourself trending towards a mission or a region-specific MAGCOM. Anyways, this is a great DoD site. Later on, I'll put the URL in the comments section so you can get right to it. It's a great little way to just remind yourself of this organization. But I'm going to show you another way to look at it as well. Before I do, I wanted to talk to you about how can you understand how the Air Force is spending money, where they spend it, et cetera. And I did a post earlier today in LinkedIn specifically on this FY23 budget. It's got all sorts of great stuff in here, helping you understand where they're spending it, why they're spending it. An example is if you're doing military construction, you can find a lot of information down there. But down here, as you start looking, and let me just get the table of contents and I'll stop here, you can begin to learn about how they're spending money and how it's split. So the Department of the Air Force is made up of the active Air Force, the reserves, and the Air National Guard, and then the Space Force, right? So basically 4 components. And one of the things I thought was interesting when I was looking at the National Guard the Air National Guard compared to the Air Force Reserve is I would have just thought that the Air Reserve had more spend than the National Guard, but it turns out the spend for Air National A&G is like twice as much. And that's an interesting piece of information I'm able to gather from looking at just this summary of the budget. If I really wanted to dig down, I would go into it. And I make this argument that if you're looking to make $1 million, $10 million over the course of your career with the selling to the Air Force, et cetera, if you're looking to make $1 million or 10 or $100 million, isn't it worth spending a week or two really going over their budget, understanding the programs they invest money in? Clearly you might not be in the weapons area, but maybe you're in the training area for professional services. Understanding how they're organized, understanding how they're spending money and what's important to them. Those kind of things are worth the time it takes. So whether you like to read or not, if you're at this level selling to the federal government and you would like to sell to the Air Force, one of the ways you can get them to understand that you care about them and you know about them is to take the time to do the research. So this is a great document on here, and then you can look at all the rest of their budgeting material that goes with FY23. So I just wanted to briefly touch on that and drive you there. I'll put this link also in the comments. I'll put all the links I'm talking about into the comments, including the ones that were less helpful from my perspective, but I'll put them in so that you can do your own research, do your own determination. So let me take you to my favorite site for the Air Force, which I find is ironic that it's not the Air Force, it's outside. It's an Air Force organization. They recently changed their name to Air and Space Forces Association. It used to be called the Air Force Association, but now it's called the Air and Space Force Association. And I want to thank my friend Kent for turning me on to this organization a while back, because it was a place for me to finally get a lot of fantastic information that led me to additional research, et cetera. So in this case, when you're looking at the Air Force Association, take the time to, I think it's like $24. Don't lock me down to this, but membership cost in here is so minimal that, again, if you're looking to make money in the Air Force, this is a place I would be okay with you spending money. By the way, I always say spend money once you start making money. So if you're not making any money, go find a teammate who's working in the Air Force, get some experience, get some money, then come back and start paying for things. But one of the things that the Air and Space Forces Association puts out that you definitely want to take a look at, 151 pages, read every one of them, right? If you really want to make money in the Air Force, take the time to read them. Now, some of these things you might go through pretty fast. And I'm going to go through some of this stuff fairly fast till I get to the part that I want to show you that is the meat of understanding the Air Force at this initial level that I want you to do. So let me get this at the page level. And I'm going to come down. I'm going to go a little bit just showing you as you go through what's in there. So there's certain activity that you can see over these pages where they're talking a lot about the Air Force in general, right? But one of the things that you're going to see me get to is the structure, page 46. So I'm going to talk a lot about that. And then as you go forward, down here, page 107, where I understand the installations, I begin to see that, the wings and what's going on. So this is a live kind of dynamic call that we're going through. So let me cruise through, because I just want to point out the certain headlines and tell you what it means to me and why I might read it. An example is right here. Right here, they're talking about 2 services, the Air Force and the Space Force, one budget, falling under the Department of the Air Force. I want to read that. I want to understand what they're talking about. In here, they talk about highlights. They talk about challenges and goals. They talk about who, the Air Force's mission. Understanding these things is important to showing your customer that you respect them, but it's also important to writing a great proposal. So coming down, there's some comments. I'm just going to skip this. These are just letter to the editor kind of things. I want to skip down past those ones that are just little ones. But here it gets into Q&A where they're talking to the Deputy Chief of Staff about the future force, where it's going, et cetera. These are things you want to read because I tell you, often people in the Air Force might not have read this. But if you're able to read this and it helps you generate questions about what's going on. So, without reading too hard, but right here it says, with the NGAD, the idea is to develop quickly and field quickly, right? That might make me ask a question when I'm meeting with a program office person about, look, I understand the Air Force is really focused on developing quickly, fielding quickly, and then making sure it's all, working for the warfighter downrange. And, how's that work within your command? How's that work within your office? Now I can perhaps get them to talk about their idea of moving quickly and operating quickly, moving at the speed of relevance. Well, I can get that from reading this. As I go through these documents, I can begin to learn questions that might work well. So coming down, you just see a lot of this exciting stuff that relates to what they're doing. Here, I just want to go forward and pause 1 second. So the Air Force budget, they talk about their budget, right? In general, they're going, and this is an older almanac, but they're going from 205 billion to 212 billion. But what they're talking about is, hey, we want to increase our budget, but also subtract in certain areas. And this is important to understand. Where is the Air Force maybe decreasing their spending, and where is that spending going up? Obviously, the graphic can help you look at it, but you can begin to see the explanation just by understanding the budget requests that they're putting out there. Coming down, you already saw some of that. So here, the Space Force spending starts to grow. I went to an event for AFA or the Air Force's Space Force Association several months back, and I went there, and they were talking a lot about where they're going with the Space Force. And one of the favorite things I liked hearing about, and they talk about these things as well, is that the Space Force tends to work only in space. That's where its area of operation is. Everybody else can somehow do their job by just walking up to the airplane or walking up to the airfield or things like that, right? But in the Space Force, you can't do that. So this is an exciting time for you to be able to help an organization, if you're on the innovative side, the professional services side, et cetera, that is able to help this Space Force grow. It's at its very earliest stages. Anyways, I get kind of excited about this stuff. So let me cruise through this. I'll let you see some of the headlines that pop up. You can always pause it if you're watching the recreate. One thing I want to point out is that it doesn't matter if you have friends from China. When you think about supporting DoD, we also need to recognize that there are nation states that we have challenges with. Russia, China, Iran, et cetera, right? These are not bad things to say. These are our adversaries. And understanding how the Air Force looks at it, how DoD and even the White House looks at it. These are important things to understand if we want to help our customer, in this case, the Air Force. Okay, so going down through here, I'm just going to cruise down. For those of you who want to support Kessel Run, by the way, I thought this was interesting that there's this transition of things Kessel Run is innovating or putting together that then gets a broader set of buyers going out into NATO outside of even the U.S. activity. So I'm going to go through these ones because this next one down here, these are kind of fun. By the way, looking at these, you can look in at any given point. You don't want to recognize every one of these people, but what if any of these people were people that you could tie back to in any of kind of your business development activity or having conversations if you know of any of these people? So let's get into the part that I was talking about with the almanac. You see where it begins to talk about a lot of the activity, and I can't get into all of it, but when you look at the budget I was talking about, let's say the Air Force has, I don't know, 100, 200 billion dollars, whatever it is, budget. Well, a huge portion of that budget goes to planes, and another huge portion goes to personnel, people, who are military and civilian employees. And so, there's not always 100 or 200 billion that's a spend for us small businesses, much smaller. Well, when you come through the budget or you come through the almanac here, you begin to understand this so much more. Let's talk about the structure though, because this is the part that I really, really think could be helpful to you as you're understanding the Air Force and digging deeper. I recommend you understand the structure and then begin to cross off any of the organizations where you think to yourself, hey, I'm not going to be able to help them. So coming in here, right, I just look at the Air Force, and some of this stuff might be a little outdated because it is 1 year old. But this idea of understanding how we're coming down from Department of Air Force, the headquarters, into the MAGCOMs, numbered Air Force, right? That whole thing we talked about, where you see the squadrons coming on up. This is the language. As you want to work in the Air Force, you want to be able to speak the language. I talked about MAGCOMs, and so here they are listed in here for both active and reserve components. Talked about numbered Air Forces, right? This is where you can begin to look at them. I'm running out of time because I want to keep it to 30 minutes. But one thing that you'll see farther down in this almanac is every one of these major commands are explained in much more detail. So let's come on down here. Actually, let me zoom this out again. So here they just talk about the personnel breakdown. I'm not going to go into it too much, but you can begin to understand this and understand the size of the Air Force, the bases that are out there. Obviously, you can look here and see a group of bases. They also share that information in another section. So this is just who's in there. And so here it just puts it into perspective more about how they're broken down. So if you're in the personnel services side of the business, training or diversity, things like that, understanding this information before you go in will help you. So I'm going to skip past the pay. If you don't understand the ranks, here they are. It's a great thing to do, is to actually be able to recognize people's ranks, what they're called, etc. I'm going to skip there. You see where we come into spending, right? And this one's always fun because it talks about the defense budget as it relates to the overall country budget over the years, or country's GDP. Coming down here, you see the same kind of things. I want to skip past here. This whole set of budget activity begins to put it in perspective, right? So these are billions of dollars. And I talked about the Air Force as a $207 billion. They're going to 212 in 2022. And then you begin to put it in perspective to the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, right? The DoD spends about $750 billion or around that range for 2023. And you see this breakdown. You can begin to understand how the money is being spent. So they go through a lot, and then you can begin to see how it's broken down. You remember I told you military personnel as an example, just one thing, how much of the budget is, this is DoD in this case, but how much of the budget is going towards individuals. So let me, I want to get to one more part just to show you. So right in here, this is the part I just wanted to show you, is that as you come down, you begin to talk about the Air Force. The Space Force is a completely different organization. They'll work together, but it is a completely different organization. So take the time to get to know them. Don't just be excited about the Space Force and say, hey, I'm going to go out there and work there. But as you come down, you begin to see the breakdown that is in here, and you begin to see the major units where the Space Force is located. And by the way, I'm just using the Space Force. This is replicated for all the other major commands as well as you go down. So down here, this is just lineage stuff. Whoop. So let's use this guy as the last example. So this is a command, right? The Air Education and Training Command. In here, this is like 3 or 4 levels down below the Department of Air Force. But coming in, I can see where they're headquartered, right? I can see this breakdown. It's something I did with the 16th Air Force for one of my customers on the cyber side, is let's look at all the units within this command and then decide which ones of those units are ones worth pursuing. And so when you're doing business development activities, you should do something similar. I encourage you to reach out to your PTAC counselor and talk to them about, hey, I'm looking to go into the Air Force, especially if you've got an Air Force base near you. Can you help me kind of work through which ones I might look at? You could also try to do this with a small business specialist, but don't do it with either one of them until you take a minute to learn about what the major units are in the commands that you want to pursue, and then also visit their website, because they will talk about, hey, here's a fact sheet, here's what we buy, things like that. I know I just blew through a fire hose of information. Let me come to this top screen because I like this one. A lot of information out there, but as you start doing this activity within the Air Force, and let me just come back on camera for a second as I wrap up, As you start getting into the Air Force, know that you can follow these threads of documents that will lead you to more information, make you more knowledgeable and smarter about what questions to ask before you then start knocking on doors in the Air Force of the small business specialist or the program office, or enlisting the help of the procurement technical assistance center near you, a counselor near you, asking for their help. You've got all these documents that can give you the information that will help you ask the right questions, that will help you understand, does the Air Force or this command buy what I sell? Just take the time to learn it. Hope you found it valuable. If you found this content valuable today, give it a thumbs up. I want you to remember that government contracting, it's not a secret. It's just a process. I'll see you in the next video.